What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we have a very special episode. But if you're new to the podcast, we do have several different types of episodes. We have rants where I kind of go on and, really just discuss more of hot topics and call out some of the BS in the industry. We have a full-length interview today, which is what we'll have. But there's also quick mental minute episodes and deep dive educational explorations, such as getting in onto some studies or just going really into the weeds and diving in on that side of things. But if you have any questions, future topics, or guest suggestions, you can reach out to us or email that in at inthezonepodcast123@gmail.com. And we don't do ads or sponsorships or monetize this in any way. So all we believe is that if you got any value out of this, please share it. Share it to someone that you may know, or just throw it on any of your social stories to help spread the word. But without further ado, we got Mike McFerran. He was formerly at Wake Forest as the director of player development, and now is with the Oakland A's, so I guess soon to be Vegas A's, right here in the next coming years. And he's the pitching performance coach out there. But Mike, welcome on, my man.
Thanks for having me, Garrison.
Oh, absolutely. We recently connected over at the Bridge Seminar, which very well done, by the way. I think that was one of my favorite events that I went to all of last year, really the past couple years.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, everything just kind of came together so well, where it was like the biomechanics side, then you have, guys talking about seam shifted wake, and then people talking about performance. So it all kind of interwove and kind of filled a lot of gaps for some people, especially in the private sector that may not have the resources that you would have at Wake or at a pro level, right? To where you have all of that at your fingertips to be able to access, right?
Right.
But I guess before we kind of get into any of those intricacies, I want the listeners to kind of hear a little bit more about your story. And I'm curious myself, because I honestly know up until a certain point, but maybe kind of start with your playing career and then to where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. It's a different story for me. As I get kind of higher up in baseball, I guess most of the guys are players, right, and then become coaches in some way, shape, or form. And I, of course, did the same thing, but didn't reach the level that I was looking to get to. I grew up wanting to be a professional baseball player, and I could really pitch. Like I knew the mental game of pitching. I knew how to get guys out, and I loved to compete. And I kind of fell in love with the game from a very early age, and really just wanted to be a good pitcher. And I kind of got to college and started looking for some of the answers I knew I was going to need, and couldn't find what I needed. And I realized that there was this big gap of missing knowledge that I really hunted and looked for, and tried to apply it myself and figure a lot of it out myself, which anyone who's gone through something similar can probably tell you it didn't go very well, especially in the age before all the information. And it was really just on the cusp of data and technology and where baseball is now. So I really didn't have access to a lot of what is available today. So it didn't go very well in trying to apply it to myself. And when I started coaching, when I was done with school, I ended up playing at Lynn University, Division II in South Florida, which was where I started to get a lot of the answers I was looking for. And it was a really positive experience for me playing for Garbs and starting to go down the right path in terms of information and direction. And when I was done there, I got a small coaching job for an 18U team, and I started teaching a lot of the things I tried to apply to myself, and realized that this was kind of where my purpose was. And since then, it's just been a labor of love to try and figure out how I can make as many guys better as humanly possible, and try to give back to the guys that are looking to better themselves.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny how it shifts from being you're trying to find a competitive edge to now you have a lot of little nuggets to share with a bunch of guys and help with their edge and what they're looking for, which now it's like plethora amount of information. Whereas, I don't know, back whenever I was playing, it was like blog posts and, you go to a camps far away. I went to like Texas or Florida and a bunch of these other places, right?
Yeah.
Trying to gather as much information as possible. But now it's like almost too much information. And I'm sure you probably have to do it with a lot of guys you work with to kind of unravel and be like, hey, like maybe this isn't really quite the best way for you. How do you kind of have and steer those conversations with guys?
Yeah, great point. There's a lot of information, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right information. So access to people's opinions and whatnot is tough for guys because I think guys end up searching right now, right? The,
Sure.
the two things I think are the most important in pitching development, hands down, are you got to understand who you are, right? What makes you successful in terms of pitching, whether that's strategic or your mental game, and how you go about thinking during competition, just what you do. That's number one. And then trusting that and recentering back onto that when you get off and guardrailing yourself to that. And I think guys have an intuitive sense that that's what they need, even if they don't consciously put words to it like that. And when they don't have a good idea of who they are, what makes them good to go searching. And that's when guys get really lost through the jungle of information that we currently have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and it kind of boils down to like, hey, like you mentioned before, what's your identity? What type of pitcher are you? Right? Versus you trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. Like it's not really going to fit unless you find out, okay, hey, like I may not be that IVB guy that everybody, is looking for. I'm more of a ground ball guy or, vice versa, to be able to kind of find that sweet spot, if you will, of where you should be in your performance. Right. So
Yeah, and it just comes back to who you are, right? It's an individual basis, and I don't think there's one shape across the board. I think everyone's completely different, and they should be embraced for who they are, both as people and as pitchers. And so that's where that conversation starts with me. So it's just to figure out who you are as a pitcher, what you do uniquely well, and get you to latch on to that.
absolutely. Well, and you probably have some baseline things that you're looking for to kind of assess and find out like, hey, where are you on this roadmap to, whatever part of your development you're in. So maybe a guy's not having a plus off speed pitch or something like that, but you can see where their fastball is and you're like, okay, hey, how are we going to play this off of what you already have that's really good? So what are maybe some of those indicators that you're looking for whenever you're just first time you're seeing a guy? Maybe it's, now when you're with the A's, you're like, hey, show me what you got. Let's see what we're working with. And then, how do you move forward after making that initial assessment?
Yeah, and that is the first step, and I'm glad you started with that because I think that's the most important piece that so many people skip over. They want to jump right to coaching each individual player, and I think you have to observe them first. Otherwise, you're fiddling and messing with things that probably shouldn't be fiddled with. You don't want to get in the way of someone presenting their strength to you, right? And then having that strength disappear before you even knew what it was. So that's where I start. We have to observe what they do so we can figure out what they do well. And honestly, what they do well is when they get outs, right? It's like, what do they do consistently that gets guys outs? And let the game tell you what those things are a lot of the time. And then, on top of that, of course, there's a lot of intricate things in looking at, their arsenal. So the type of pitches they throw and how they complement each other and where they should live in the zone and all that kind of stuff. But I think the game will tell you a lot, and I think it's important to pay attention to that first in practice.
Oh, absolutely. And especially right now with, minor league season getting ready to kick off, like really at some point you're just like, hey, you got to go out there and play. Let's see what you got with what we're rolling with and then make adjustments from there. But you never really want to overhaul a guy, like you said, before finding out how they perform. Like, for example, you see a guy's pen and he's cutting every pitch, but he's actually like that cutter fastball guy. So you're like, hey, if I would have taken away that, it would have completely destroyed his season already right off the bat.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So I guess with that, obviously, you have a lot less time from when you were transitioning. So is it more for you just right now, kind of observing versus like when you were with Wake, you had a little bit more time in the fall to kind of help them develop and find out where they were before they started into that season?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in terms of how I'm going about my business on from the college side to the pro side, but there's a lot of differences too for sure. And first off, Wake was so good for me. I'm unbelievably grateful for that opportunity, and they gave me my shot, and I was a part of something really special, and that was a lot of fun. So even past what we ended up doing there, like the culture that we had there was really amazing, and
Oh, you could
that
tell too. It's really awesome.
yeah, yeah. it was something really special, and it was an awesome time. And going into the pro side of things and noticing some of the differences just in the way you go about your business. There's a lot less time in college, to your point. In the fall, you get to watch these guys pitch for so long just against ourselves, and in the spring, it's a lot of preseason where you get to see, okay, what do we need to polish on this guy, and whatnot. But it's a similar role. I'm just overseeing how pitchers' games are built using whatever means is necessary. With Oakland, the same way I did with Wake, whether that's with data or video or collaborating between departments and trying to link up different people in different parts of the org, and just trying to make as many guys become successful pitchers as humanly possible and raise the floor of the org, as best I can. So it's very similar. There's a lot more people. The sheer amount of people is very different. I went from working with like 10 people to probably over 100. So there's a lot of relationships to build and maintain.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. Yeah.
I bet. And just making sure that everyone's on the same page, pulling in the same direction, not even just with one guy, but just as probably the staff as a whole, right? Making sure everyone's speaking the same language, because every athlete, if they hear it one way, it might be a little bit different, but as long as that is still being spearheaded to where they need to go versus, going off on a completely different path, that's really what you want to avoid, right?
Right, for sure. And to answer your earlier question, it's a lot of observing, right? It's just the same way I would take observing a player, right? We want to see, what does he do well, does he not do well, kind of where are we, who does he think he is? The same ideas you want to take with the player. I've tried to take that as I've come into Oakland and just look at what do we do as an org that's really good? What do we do that can be improved upon? What are the holes that I can plug? Kind of where do I fit into all this and provide the best leadership I can provide, and learn as much as I possibly can. These guys have been doing this for forever. There's so many guys that have been doing it for 20 plus years in the same place, and that says so much about them and about the organization. And so for me to come in and just start changing everything and having inputting my input heavily off the get go, I think would be the wrong way to go about it. So there's a lot of observation, but there are certainly things where we can say, okay, we can get to work on this right away, and it'll have a positive impact without changing a whole lot. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny. You do, like you said, observe, and me just kind of going back to the old school, back in science class, just the scientific method, like, hey, we're going to observe, take notes, maybe test this out, see what changes, versus, early on, there was a lot of coaches that would be like, hey, this is our mold. This is what we're going to try to put you in this little box. And if you don't fit in that, then see ya, so it's better to kind of be like, okay, hey, like there's a more ecological approach to this, to have you just kind of see how you're developing. And then we nudge you, make sure you don't go, into the weeds, so to speak, to make sure you're still growing as organically as possible, but making sure you're not, getting into any ruts there.
Yeah, and when you do it that way, it's slower in the beginning, right? You feel like you're not making as much progress right when you start, but it gets exponential over time. And we certainly saw that at Wake, and then you saw how quickly that really took off. And so it does pay off dividends when you are making quality decisions rather than just the quantity of the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, and it seems kind of counterintuitive, especially as a coach, where you're like, hey, I have to look like I'm doing something and proving myself, proving why I'm here. Right. Versus you're like, hey, you know what? Sometimes the best decision is no decision at all. We're just hanging out, getting to know this guy. And then finally he opens up and he's like, hey, like, what do you think of this pitch? Or, hey, I feel like I'm cutting my fastball some. And you're like, yeah, you are. What do you feel? Like just developing that relationship is definitely goes a long way.
Yeah, 100%.
And especially, as you're going through the season, I'm sure, everybody kind of has different roles, but it's different from a pitching coach who's there on the field every day. They can probably still communicate with you and let you know kind of like what his tendencies are, versus maybe, the rover coach that's just coming in and maybe he sees the worst outing all season so far. And you're like, okay, well, what changed? Or was there anything different here? Did you just have an off day? Or were you trying to do something completely different? Right. And I think being able to have those conversations and finding out what works and what doesn't work is going to be huge.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And to your what we talked about a little bit before we hopped on, but the patterns that guys fall into. I mean, it's really about creating the best patterns possible, right? And with today's technology, like we see video and data on every pitch. So getting to know who a player is doesn't happen in person a lot of the time. In full, anyways, right? So there's a who someone is, or at least have an idea of who they are over the course of time, just from watching them from afar. And so when you do go in, you have an idea of who they are and what they need and what you need to work on. So you don't take that one atom entirely for who they are.
Oh, for sure. Do you think some of the, I guess, kind of predictive stats or anything that you guys look at after you get a certain amount of games in, is that something that you can also kind of see where they would be trending to maybe help them pivot into a better role, or maybe move from a starter to a mid relief guy to see how they would maybe transition into that? Is that kind of go into some of the decision making if they're not maybe having as much success early on in the season?
Yeah, like I said, I think the game tells you everything, and once you have a thread of really good patterns, and you have an idea of who they are, and they start to kind of latch onto that identity, then you know immediately when they're off. And I think this is something at Wake we were really good at is we taught guys who they were, but then as soon as they kind of get off of that idea, you can see it a lot of the time when they pitch, but it'll also red flag in the data like almost immediately. Something's different about this guy. I always equate pitching development to I like this analogy to Plinko. If you ever watch like the Price is Right and they're doing Plinko where the disc goes through
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
pins, right?
Yeah.
And that's what pitching development feels like, that where you polish up this like this, the pitcher being like this, and you throw it through the pins, and you want to try to get a consistent result as it goes through every time. And once you get that consistent result over and over again, you can kind of guardrail that idea about who they are. And whenever they get off and they start going into different parts of the bin at the bottom, then you know that it's time to make an adjustment on them. So you're basically just throwing them through the ringer
Yeah.
many times and many times.
No, I love it. I love it. And whatever comes out on the other side is really just feedback. And, a lot of guys do kind of take it personally. I know I did as a player. I was like, oh man, like this is kind of defining me of like who I am as a person, when really it's just like, no, dude, you just had a bad game. It's fine.
Yeah.
You just got to make
Yep.
an adjustment.
Yep. As long as you don't go searching, like as long as you have an idea of who you are, then a bad game is just that. It's just okay. What adjustments are what does it say about how I was today, rather than like what does it say about who I am? When you start searching for who you are, that's when guys really get into trouble that way.
Oh, 100%. Well, and I'm sure you probably saw a lot of this too, especially at Wake, where you're kind of coming around, seeing guys or another team for the second time, and they already have an idea of, what guys' stuff looks like. How do you kind of, I guess, almost create a different look, or maybe, you hear pitching backwards from the old school way, or just kind of switching up your approach? How do you guys go about approaching that now, especially whenever you're going through a longer season? Hopefully this question kind of makes sense, but when you're seeing the same person or the same opponents over and over, how do you mix up the game plan?
Yeah, great question. Pitching is all about being difficult for hitters to adjust to. Plain and simple. So, and you can do that in many different ways. But if you can become difficult to adjust to by hitters, then you're doing your job right. I had the great pleasure of meeting Dave Stewart, hanging out with Dave Stewart for a while this spring. Oakland legend and one of the better starting pitchers of his era, right? And I didn't know a whole lot about Dave, and it was really awesome to get to know him and kind of pick his brain. One of the topics in professional baseball for sure is like how do you create consistent starters? Because I think the goal is in developing starting pitching. And so what goes into that? And I asked him that question. I said, hey, in your opinion, because you were so great, what goes into starting pitching? What are some of those pillars? And his answer was basically have more pitches and know how to use them appropriately, which I thought was so simple and really true. Like he just had the appropriate amount of pitches to get hitters out with, and he knew how to use them in each situation. And one thing he told me, which I really loved, is a lot of times he would back pocket his curveball to like the third time through the lineup. So hitters wouldn't even see his curveball until the third time. And he became his own relief pitcher effectively, which I thought was genius.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's hoping that you got all of your pitches ready to rock and roll through that third time, and then you're like, okay, hey, here it is. But
Yep.
sometimes days happen where you're like, hey, changeup's not there. We got to go to this thing early, and then you're kind of, putting more chips on the table, so to speak, and gambling a little bit more on that side of it. Um,
Yeah, you got to be good enough to do that for sure. Like
oh
it's
yeah,
not like if you're a two pitch guy, I wouldn't save one of your pitches to the third time through the lineup. But and your fastball command's got to be excellent in order to do that. But that was insightful because he that was his method of being difficult to adjust to right over long periods of time,
mm.
which I think made him successful.
Oh yeah. Well, and it makes total sense though, because if they're not, I use this word of tuning a lot. It's kind of more of an ecological term, but it's more of like, hey, like, are they being able to make those adjustments, or are they seeing that and then, you know, whether it's the sights of what they're looking at, or maybe even just how they're getting ready to have their approach before they step into the box, it can completely change how a hitter even goes in and, uh, you know, goes about his game versus the pitcher.
Absolutely, yeah. Baseball is very offensive and defensive. It's binary, in a lot of ways, right? If you take the offensive, the energetic response of the hitter is probably going to be defensive, and vice versa. And that's something that I wish everyone could step out of their bodies and see, and that's what I really urge video watching, like watch as much video of yourself as humanly possible and try to take yourself out of the first person and just watch what's happening within the game, uh, and see how hitters are responding to you. Because a lot of times it's subconscious, and they'll tell you exactly how they're feeling against you and how you can beat them just based on watching yourself from the third person.
Oh yeah. Well, and even too, whenever you're watching video, or even for me coaching right now, if guys are really aggressive on the base paths, that also kind of gets the pitcher in a little bit more of a defensive mode where they're like, oh crap, okay, hey, I can't throw this pitch away, or like have to make sure that he doesn't steal on me. And it takes his focus off of actually attacking the hitter, which gives the hitter also a better chance too. So,
100%.
you
Yep.
flip that around, you're like, all right, hey, are you in attack mode, or are you, just kind of more defense, like, oh, hope I don't make a mistake? Because then if you're there, you're already done.
If you beat yourself, then the only person that can win in that situation is the hitter.
Yeah,
Yeah. Don't beat
very
yourself.
true.
Like go attack that guy and beat that guy. That's your only job.
Hmm. Well, and I think we've all probably seen this guy, coach this guy. I was also this guy whenever I was, in bullpens and stuff, and I wouldn't hit spots or stuff like that, and I'd be cursing at myself under my glove, or just like, like kind of really self-defeating self-talk, right? And that also does go a long way. But there's it's a fine line to walk where you're like, hey, you want to get better and improve, but you don't want to be doing that to where you're self-defeating. So like, hey, I haven't arrived, but I also shouldn't be beating myself down to the pulp here, you know. But as far as like maybe command things, and is is there a mental component that you focus on with command, or even just trying to help guys improve a little bit more in the precision of what they're throwing?
Yeah, I think command stuff ultimately most of the time comes down to the mental piece.
Yeah,
And I think not to say it's never mechanical because I do think there's things obviously like there's some
let's
mechanical
start
cues
with
you
that.
need to keep yourself
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
But I think most of the time it comes down to not understanding who they are strategically and how to execute on that. Right. So they don't know their game plan. They don't know where they pitch in the zone. They don't know what pitches are great. And when you see them get the confidence of playing with a stacked deck, so to speak, like that's when I think they start to learn it better because they know where they're going and they know that it's going to work and they move with the confidence through that piece.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I'm totally with you on that it starts mental. And even, outside of the performance side, even some guys who get yips or something like that, I think it might start mentally, and then, maybe they're trying to change something, all right? Like you said, they don't know who they are. So they're trying to make themselves into something that they're not. And then that also shows up in their patterns. Even some of the amateur guys that I coach, right? Like, if they're very spastic, or just kind of like all over the place mentally, of not really having much focus, that also kind of resembles how they're pitching, to be honest. Like, they're
Right.
just like ball here, and then okay, hey, now we got one, and spray maybe a couple, and
Yeah.
it's really kind of cool though how it does parallel their mindset.
Yeah, it does. It's a direct result. Like once you know what you're looking for, you can tell exactly when a guy is pitching and when he's trying to like correct himself, which are
Correct
two
yourself.
completely different things.
Yeah, getting too
Yeah.
intrinsically focused, laboring is probably, another
Yeah.
thing that you can go for it, right? Like, no, yeah, it all makes sense, especially the more you're around the game, the faster you can pick it out too. And you're like,
Yeah, it's
all right.
it's all about like this guy's objective. Like, it's this guy's objective to get guys out, and you can see that in the way that he's carrying himself and how locked in he is, or is he trying to like be perfect and fix whatever he's doing internally? And
Mhm.
those are two very different things. And if people just figured that out, like it would become less about stuff, and it would become more about pitching, which I think is really the whole point.
Yep. Pitching and getting dudes out. You don't have to blow up the radar gun every time to get a guy out. And
Yeah,
we see that a lot. Even myself training guys to help gain some velocity or help get their edge of some off speed pitches, right? Like sometimes that command suffers because they're putting too much of a focus on that. So taking a step back and realizing, hey, like we can't just be throwing north. We have to be able to go in and get dudes out because it's hard to defend a walk. As much as probably some of the coaches have said it in the past, you're like, hey, I'd rather someone put it in play, give us a little bit more of a chance than just walk in the house. So,
yeah, for sure. And that's a fine line too. I think you're right. Like obviously, that's usually what kills pitchers is letting guys on base for free. But the way we go about that, like the how. So if we know that I think as coaches we just kind of handle the what. Like, hey, you can't walk guys, got to put the ball in his hand, et cetera, et cetera.
mhm,
But like, what's the how? What's the how?
mhm.
How do we do that? It's like if you want a good result, you need to teach them the why, you need to teach them the points. The what they'll get, and they'll usually be on board with the what. But if you give them the why or the how, I think that's when success usually comes.
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally on board with that because we've had probably a lot of coaches in our past playing. They're like, okay, yeah, I don't want to walk guys. This is obvious, but how do I not walk guys, right?
Right.
Help me make that adjustment. Whether that's changing a focal point, something as simple as that, or even just like, okay, hey, like we're gonna throw nothing but sliders because your strike percentage is way higher with sliders than it is with fastballs. So we're just gonna hammer this. If they make contact, who cares? We're gonna get the higher chance of getting guys out.
No doubt.
Love it. Well, yeah, I mean, shoot, Mike, we went through a lot of stuff in it in this, and I think it's all really good. And I did kind of mention a little bit before about the bridge and how there was a lot of things that were kind of woven together. But no, I'm sure you probably are maybe seeing some, maybe not quote unquote gaps of the pitching or really just baseball industry in general. But what do you think some of those next cutting edge things could be to help some guys coming up here in the future?
So I think in terms of cutting edge, like the technology is just going to keep getting exponentially better and better.
Oh,
I don't think guys even need to really think about what to do next. I think that it's going to show themselves, right, in terms of what tools to use and how to go about their business, all that stuff. I think it takes care of itself in today's world. What I do think the baseball industry is losing is we need to teach them to be present with the game.
hmm.
Like we're definitely losing that. There's too many robots pitching. Like they're throwing shapes and they're trying to repeat without actually competing for an out. And I think that's really dangerous. You just see it in their mindset. Like they get the ball, they don't even look at the hitter a lot of the time. They're not reading what the hitter's doing. Um, and that's kind of the world we live in. Of like, if you have good stuff, then you will get rewarded. And that only goes so far. Like if you want to be successful, you need to understand that my job is to get guys out, and in order to do that, you need to compete, right? And to be honest with you, that leaves that sounds like a knock on today's world, but that actually leaves a competitive advantage for the guys that do it that way.
Mhm.
So that's the perspective I'm trying to give guys is most guys are not competing. If you learn to compete with the stuff that you've been working on developing, and you're going to be very successful because you're an outlier in doing it the right way. So that's
Oh
what
yeah.
I would wish on the baseball industry.
Or even just being present, like, hey, like I mentioned before, like, hey, maybe your changeup isn't there. You got to learn how to be present, compete with what you have versus keep trying to continue to throw the pitch that you may not have for that day. Right. Um, and even for some of the starters too, like what we were talking about with Stewart. I had a conversation with Walker Bueller once, which kind of was, well, interesting in and of itself, right? But he was like, I was looking over some of his data points and stuff, TrackMan, and I was like, dude, why do you throw a cutter? It's not very good when we're talking about like just shapes in general. It's like it's not an elite pitch, and he's like, well, it's another look for them and another pitch for me to have in my back pocket. And I was like,
Yeah, it serves a purpose.
got it.
Exactly right. So that's a guy that gets like it doesn't have to be the best pitch ever. It needs to serve a purpose for his game, right, and fit in like a puzzle piece. Um, yeah, that's a guy who's pitching. Is what that
Oh,
tells me.
100%. And that's why he's at the level that he's at, because he has that
Yeah,
kind of, quote unquote feel on how to get guys out.
yeah, yep, totally agree.
What would you, was there a favorite time, maybe either in your playing career, maybe even a guy you were coaching, that you just knew that, hey, they were locked in, they were in the zone? Tell us a little bit about that story and how that kind of unplayed.
Oh yeah, I got the perfect story for this. We're in Omaha. We're playing LSU, right, in what I consider the best 3-game series in the history of college baseball.
Absolutely.
To be a part of that was an honor, really, to be 30 feet away in that game. The bump play and to be so close to home plate for that, and it just the perfect. I like to call that play the perfect baseball play, right? Perfect
Oh,
bunt,
electric.
perfect play,
Yeah.
perfect call, perfect slide. Like all of it was just perfect atmosphere. It's just everything kind of came together. And so it was the height for these guys. I watched them go from boys to men in a lot of ways because the environment weeded out who was strong enough to um, call up to the level they needed to perform at in order to be successful.
Mhm.
Mike Massey was one of those guys that really rose to that occasion, and he did not pitch well his first outing in Omaha. Like I think he let the moment get to him. The crowd was really big. He had felt that before, and he got his second chance in like the biggest of situations in Game 3 against LSU in extra innings in a scoreless ball game, and he just absolutely rose to the occasion. And I remember having a long conversation with him the day before that in right field during BP, and he's just kind of telling me everything he's going through, like listening to the crowd and how do I handle this? And I feel like I need to do this, and I need to be more careful with my pitches. And I kind of lit him up. And I'm sure he'll tell you the same thing. And I just, dude, your job is to attack that. Your swing and miss is like one of the best in recent history. I go, you're not a guy that paints, you're a guy that attacks with 2 pitches, right? And you just overpower everybody. And I saw the gears start to kind of turn, and I watched him, own the moment in the biggest of stages, and he lost himself in that in the best way possible, and he just attacked guys, and something bigger than him kind of took over, and it was really cool to watch.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I remember watching that too. Um, that's just one of those moments that, like you said, it was all perfect. Just the stuff that you, even if you even tried to visualize it, put yourself in that situation, you're just like, would I really rise to the occasion here? I don't know. But hey, this is what everybody dreams about being, and putting themselves in that situation, ready to be the dude to go into that attack mode and not, you know, really kind of what we were talking about before. You can't be timid. You can't think that, oh, I have to avoid this or avoid, certain things. And it's kind of crazy how that also does parallel life too, right? Like transitioning from
Absolutely.
boys to men, right? Like you can't be, oh, I can't get in a wreck or I can't do this because it's going to push you probably a more likely chance to get in a wreck if you're overly cautious or, trying to avoid something to the utmost degree, right? It's something that you have to just be like, you know what, we're gonna go full force into this thing, and whatever happens, we'll adapt and adjust from there.
Yeah, so true, man. Inaction out of fear is the worst action that you can take, right? In life and in baseball, you have to attack the situation, and then it goes how it goes, and you make adjustments based on the feedback that you get. And that's the only way to success. It's the only way to closing in on the potential that you have. If you ever really want to know how good you are, it's got to be an attack first, adjust second mentality.
Mhm.
In order to do that. And so I couldn't agree more. That's with anything with pitching or with life. Like you just have to take what you want. or take the best action and take what you want, and just get the feedback necessary after you do that.
No doubt. No doubt. That's awesome. Well, Mike, dude, I'm out of questions, man. Do you have anything else to say to the listeners, or for anyone who might be tuning in to, help them get in the zone, or maybe even get to where you're at in your position in your career right now?
No, this has been great, man. Thanks a lot for having me on. I hope some of this is insight for guys,
Yeah.
who have been in my situation or rolling through. Especially like getting into the pro game from the college side.
Mhm.
That sheds a little bit of light on things. And no, I think what you're doing is awesome. And educating people, just become obsessed with growth and bettering yourself, and just watch your life, go the direction that you want it to go in.
That's it. Growth mindset all the time. Love to see it. Awesome. Well, Mike, again, appreciate you coming on, taking the time to do this. And for those of you listening, stay in the zone.